They didn't even flinch when they humiliated him. The silence that followed was worse than the insult. Inside the cold, sterile lobby of Horizon Capital, under the buzz of fluorescent lights and behind a marble counter polished to perfection, a middle-aged teller named Richard held a stack of documents like they were contaminated. Each paper Daniel Walsh had handed over was legitimate. Every page bore the logos, legal signatures, and contract seals required to open a foundation account. But when Richard reached the line that listed Julian Hayes, spouse and co-founder, his hand paused, his lips curled, his eyes narrowed with performative disbelief. Then, loudly, deliberately, he asked a question that cracked through the silence like a whip across a cathedral. "This is your husband?" Like a real husband. Dozens of eyes turned toward Daniel. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply stood there in his navy blazer, a slim rainbow pin glinting on his lapel, breathing in a moment that wasn't unfamiliar but still burned all the same. Richard didn't wait for an answer. He looked away, as if Daniel's existence was something his eyes couldn't bear. The silence stretched, and then, as if doing Daniel a favor, Richard stacked the papers and slid by them back across the counter. "I'm going to need more clarity. Maybe find someone a bit more legally appropriate to handle this." Daniel stared down at the papers, the result of years of sacrifice, of midnight planning, of calls that bled into dawn. The documents weren't just proof of funding. They were the first public step for Equal Start, the nonprofit he and Julian had built together. $40 million in capital had just been approved. Funds to support LGBTQ+ entrepreneurs who had no voice in boardrooms, no handshakes in investment circles. And yet, all Richard saw was a man in love with another man. He made no effort to hide his discomfort. There was no legal reason to deny the account, no procedural grounds to reject the application. Just one man's prejudice, hiding behind a thin layer of corporate policy. Daniel felt the pressure build in his chest, but he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He gathered the papers slowly, page by page, making sure not one corner folded or bent. He met Richard's eyes with the calm of someone who had survived bigger storms, because this wasn't new. This wasn't even the worst. He left the counter in silence, but the words Richard refused to speak had already carved themselves deep enough. Outside, the air was sharp with fog. Daniel stood still for a moment beneath the massive glass sign that read Horizon Capital. He could see his reflection, sharp suit, clean posture, tired eyes. No matter how much success he carried, no matter how carefully he prepared, there were still places that asked him to prove he belonged. And yet, there was something different this time. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found her name, Elaine, legal. A moment later, he was on the line. "I need you, Ken," he said, "and bring everything because we're going to remind them who we are." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Elaine, his attorney and longtime friend, a brilliant, relentless woman who transitioned in her early 30s, understood too well. And what she knew, she fought for. Daniel took one last look at the building behind him. He didn't feel powerless. He felt something else rising, something patient, something sharper than vengeance. Because what they refused to touch would soon touch everything they built. And this time they wouldn't be able to look away. To hear what happened when Daniel stepped back into that room, not as a client, but as a decision maker subscribed to Heart Story, we tell stories they wish no one would remember. The next morning, Daniel returned. Same documents, same suit, same determination in every step. But this time he didn't ask for Richard. He asked to speak directly with the branch manager. The receptionist hesitated. Her professional smile faltered when she asked his name, and it nearly disappeared altogether when he mentioned the purpose of his visit. Still, she led him upstairs to a quiet meeting room with white walls and zero warmth, where a woman in her 50s waited by a glass table. Karen Elliott, branch manager of Horizon Capital, San Francisco division. She didn't rise to greet him. She barely looked up. Karen flipped through the file as if handling something beneath her position. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped against the corner of the folder, her face expressionless. But when she reached the page that bore Julian's name beside his own, when she saw the word husband again, she gave a thin, sharp exhale that wasn't quite a sigh, but wasn't far off either. Then, calmly, without shame or hesitation, she closed the folder and said, "Perhaps you'd be better served at a bank that's friendlier to organizations like this." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She simply discarded him with the same quiet, brutal efficiency as the man downstairs had. No apology, no clarification, not even eye contact. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle in the pit of his stomach. Friendlier to organizations like this. The words echoed long after she fell silent, not because they surprised him, but because they confirmed what had always lived beneath the surface. A polished institution wearing tolerance like a man, discarding it the moment no one of power was watching. He didn't fight her. There was no point. He stood, buttoned his blazer, and collected the folder. "Thank you," he said, not because she deserved it, but because the restraint in his voice held more power than the fury in hers. When he stepped out of that building, the sky was overcast. The wind cut sharper than usual. But Daniel's spine was straighter than it had been when he entered, because this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about the people he represented. The countless LGBTQ+ founders who wouldn't have had the tools or resources to fight back. The teenagers dreaming in secret about opening a fashion label. The gay engineer building software in a basement. The trans woman sketching designs no one took seriously. It was for them now. He called Elaine again, but this time there was fire in his voice. "Let's give them a reason to remember who we are." And Elaine, sharp as ever, didn't need to ask for context. She already knew Horizon Capital had made a fatal miscalculation, because what they didn't know, what no one in that branch office had bothered to research, was that Daniel wasn't just the founder of Equal Start. He also sat on the board of a social innovation fund, one of the fastest-growing impact investment entities on the West Coast, managing over $200 million in climate, justice, and inclusion-based projects. And this quarter, they were searching for a new banking partner, a primary handler for long-term fund allocation and global grant disbursement. Horizon Capital had been one of the final contenders, and in just a few days, they would be walking into a private pitch meeting, unaware that one of the deciding votes belonged to the man they had silenced in their lobby, the man whose marriage they questioned, the man they tried to dismiss with a smile and a closed door. Daniel didn't need revenge. He had access, and now he had every reason to use it. 1 week later, the executive team of Horizon Capital walked into the Carlton private hall, unaware that the floor beneath them was already shifting. They had come prepared, suits crisp, deck polished, projections rehearsed to perfection. This was the final round of selection, a closed-door session to determine which financial institution would partner with the Social Innovation Fund, managing $200 million in diversified capital focused on social impact. For Horizon, it wasn't just a deal. It was prestige, validation, a chance to secure long-term influence in an emerging field of ethical finance. Their senior managing director opened with confident ease. Speaking of digital infrastructure, scalable compliance systems, and personalized service protocols, no one on the Horizon team noticed Daniel Walsh seated quietly in the front row, not until he rose. His presence was like a sudden shift in temperature. Tall, composed, dressed in a dark tailored suit, Daniel walked to the center with calm precision. A single pin gleamed against his lapel, the subtle emblem of the Equal Start Foundation. But it wasn't the pin that made Richard freeze in his seat. It was the face, the same man he had looked down on behind bulletproof glass, the same man whose documents he had rejected without cause. Richard's breath caught in his throat. His eyes flicked sideways to the colleagues beside him, to the boardroom table, to anything that might offer cover. But there was none, because Daniel wasn't a visitor here. He was one of the voting members. He was the voice they hadn't anticipated, and now the voice they couldn't escape. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't speak with anger. Instead, he addressed the room the way a judge might deliver a ruling, firm, measured, unshakably clear. I've reviewed Horizon Capital's proposal. Technically, it's sound. Your systems are capable. Your model is scalable. He paused, letting the silence fall heavy before continuing. But impact begins at the front desk. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. Inclusion isn't a word you add to your mission statement. It's how you treat the person who walks in without an appointment, the one whose name you don't recognize, the one you think can't speak for themselves. Another pause, another breath, a ripple in the stillness of the room. We can't entrust the future of inclusive finance to a bank that doesn't even know how to treat its walk-in customers with respect. There it was, not an accusation but a statement of fact. No raised voices, no need for rebuttal, just truth delivered with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to prove. The Horizon team sat still. No one turned to look at Richard, but the color had drained from his face entirely. He seemed smaller now. Not because anyone had diminished him, but because he had revealed the limits of his own dignity. Daniel stepped back from the podium without a glance in Richard's direction. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about memory. The kind of memory institutions try to erase with policy papers and scripted apologies. The kind of memory that rebuilds power from silence. The kind of memory that walks into a pitch room not to be heard, but to decay. As Daniel took his seat again, another speaker rose to offer technical questions about data security and fund distribution. The meeting continued, as if nothing had shifted, but something had, because Horizon had pitched with confidence and left with consequence. That night, the world saw what Horizon Capital hoped no one would. Daniel released a video on Equal Start's official channel. No anger, no commentary, just footage, silent, steady, undeniable. The camera angle was low, positioned discreetly beside his briefcase, but the audio was sharp. Richard's voice echoed through the lobby as clearly as it had rung through Daniel's chest that morning. This is your husband like a real husband. The words, once buried in humiliation, now lived online, shared, reposted, and dissected by activists, journalists, and ordinary viewers across the country. Hashtags surged within hours. Hashtag dignity is bankable, walk-in worth, had bank on respect. But the video was only the beginning. Within days, former employees of Horizon began coming forward. Anonymous posts, personal testimonies, allegations of a corporate culture polished for appearances, but cold behind closed doors, patterns of exclusion, stories of queer clients quietly turned away, of trans employees told their transition-made customers uncomfortable, of management meetings where names like Daniel's were followed by laughter, or worse, silence. The public listened, and so did regulators. A preliminary ethics inquiry was announced by the end of the week. Horizon's press team issued a short statement. We are investigating the matter and reaffirm our commitment to diversity and inclusion. But no one was convinced. The footage said too much. The silence afterwards said even more. Daniel didn't respond to media requests. He didn't need to. The story was no longer his alone. It had become a mirror. And then came the detail no one expected. In a live interview on a progressive finance podcast, Julian Hayes spoke. His tone was measured, but what he revealed hit like thunder. Years ago, Julian had been a rising executive at Horizon Capital, young, gifted, trusted with major account, until he came out publicly in an internal DEI event. A week later, his authority was quietly reduced. Invitations to strategy meetings stopped. Key clients were reassigned without explanation. And then came the meeting. Behind closed doors, Karen Elliott and Richard Yes, the same pair now under fire, told Julian that his personal life had become a distraction. They offered him a transfer to a more suitable role, far from public-facing decisions. Julian declined. A month later, he was gone. Until that moment, few had known of Julian's connection to Horizon. Fewer still realized that he hadn't just co-founded Equal Start, he was also now a senior advisor to the very fund evaluating Horizon's eligibility. The quiet dignity Julian had held in every press photo suddenly meant more. He had not just built something new with Daniel, he had survived the collapse of something old, something that had once promised him a future, then tried to erase him for living truthfully. Now, the very people who pushed him out sat under lights they couldn't dim. Daniel never spoke of revenge. Julian never raised his voice. But the truth had arrived anyway, wrapped not in fury but in evidence. And this time the world listened. By the end of the fiscal quarter, Horizon Capital's name had vanished from the shortlist. There was no announcement, no headline, just absence quiet, pointed, irreversible. Karen Elliott received formal notice of internal investigation. A review board would examine not only her conduct with Daniel and Julian, but a pattern of decisions stretching back over a decade with Yifeng. She didn't comment publicly, she didn't have to. Her silence only confirmed what the footage had already revealed. Richard was placed on indefinite suspension, pending ethics review. He didn't return to the lobby where he once raised his voice without fear. The corner of the counter where Daniel had stood now belonged to someone else. And though the walls still gleamed under fluorescent lights, something had shifted. Not just at that branch, but across every conversation happening in its shadow. 1 week later, in a sunlit auditorium lined with rows of press and nonprofit leaders, Daniel took the stage. This time, there were no documents for approval, no papers slid across cold glass, just a signature and a decision. The Social Innovation Fund had chosen its official banking partner. It wasn't the expected choice, not one of the multinational institutions, not the flashy digital-first startups. It was North Bay Mutual, a modest, community-rooted bank headquartered just 2 counties north. The decision stunned many in the room. But when Daniel began to speak, the logic was undeniable. Integrity, he said, isn't measured by market share. He paused. The room stilled. Years ago, I walked into North Bay to apply for a personal loan. I was rejected, not for who I was, but because I lacked the credit history to prove I could manage the debt. It hurt. But a week later, I received a letter. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet, yellowed at the corners. It was from Marcus Ortega, the bank's director. He said, "We failed to treat you like a person. That's a greater debt than any loan we could have offered. I'm changing our policy. Come back when you're ready." The audience sat in quiet awe. Daniel continued, voice calm but steady. "Marcus is a trans man. He made a mistake, but he didn't hide from it. He faced it. He rewrote the rules. And now he runs a bank where no one needs to prove their dignity to be seen." Julian stood beside him, silent but proud. There was no bitterness in Daniel's voice, no trace of mockery or triumph, just a simple truth. Spoken in delight, disrespect costs more than any check we'll ever write. Cameras clicked, hands clapped, and outside the auditorium, stories began to shift, emails rewritten, HR departments taking longer meetings, voices once ignored now quietly invited back into rooms they were once shut out of. Daniel and Julian didn't stay for the reception. They walked out hand in hand, toward a waiting car, toward whatever came next, not just for them, but for those still waiting behind unwelcoming counters, because the story wasn't about winning. It was about choosing not to lose yourself along the way. Have you ever been judged before anyone heard your full story? Tell us below. Subscribe to Heart Story, where every truth told builds the future we all deserve.